I feel a little bit safer. They weren't human. I don't see them as human. I felt like I was cleaning up a mess.
It was Thanksgiving Day 2012 on Elm Street in Little Falls, Minnesota, where a nightmarish scenario played out for two teenage cousins after illegally entering into a home that was not their own. They would never leave the house alive. An entire day would pass before police would learn of the horrific details that took place in the house that day. What is up, Ewu crew? Today, we will be dissecting the case of Byron David Smith. His controversial trial was aggressively argued over in courts and taverns across rural Morrison County, Minnesota, as people disagreed over how justice should be served. Is Byron David Smith a Second Amendment hero, as some online believe, for standing up for the right to defend himself and his property? Or is he a calculated, cold-blooded killer hunting down his unsuspecting victims, drawing them into his murderous snare? During this 2012 Thanksgiving tragedy, the small town of Little Falls had little to be thankful for. Let's get into it. Byron David Smith, who was 64 years old at the time of the incident, was a single man living by himself. His house, situated on some of the northernmost banks of the Mississippi River, shows serious signs of weathering where it is dwarfed by the tall cluster of pine trees that surround it. Little Falls sits right in the middle of the state of Minnesota. It is a relatively small but quaint town that is home to less than 9,000 residents. Although Smith's home wasn't near the other houses, neighbors frequently complained about him. They claimed that he always shot his guns in his backyard, and neighbors voiced concerns that his stray bullets might hit nearby children. Smith, a Vietnam veteran, had worked for the United States government as a security engineer with the State's Department for decades. He traveled the globe, spending years in cities such as Bangkok, Cairo, Moscow, and Beijing. At some points, he even had more than 50 employees under his supervision. His job with the department was to protect the United States embassies around the world against the threat of terrorism and international espionage. This high-clearance position not only required serious background checks and mental health screenings, but it was a job that could only be done by someone with skills in surveillance and by someone who is very security conscious. A spokesperson for the State Department confirmed that Smith retired 6 years prior to the 2012 incident. His house on Elm Street was said to have been burglarized on several occasions. The last break-in reported to the Morrison County Sheriff's Office took place the previous October. Thieves allegedly stole $10,000 worth of property from Smith's home, including cash, electronics, and even Smith's shotgun. He was fed up with the multiple robberies, telling police, "Whoever it was that was breaking into my home was doing it for so long that I was no longer able to live in fear. I was far over the edge." Some of the other items that were stolen were very personal to Smith, including a watch that his father was awarded for suffering as a prisoner of war, and some of Smith's own medals. Because of these frequent burglaries, Smith had installed security systems in the home in the hopes of preventing it from occurring again. It would be Smith's own home security system that would capture video and audio of the shocking incident in his home on November 22nd, 2012. As most residents of Little Falls were getting ready to sit down for a turkey dinner, Haley Kiefer and her cousin, Nicholas Brady, were scoping out potential targets to burglarize, knowing that homes sat empty as families got together for the holiday. Smith's security cameras record Nicholas Brady as he snooped around the property. Little did he know that this is exactly what Byron David Smith was anticipating. Smith told police that he had parked his car at a neighbor's house to make it appear that he wasn't home on the day of the killings. In the video, you can see him leave the house and park down the street before returning. He also unscrewed all the bulbs in the ceiling lights, presumably for his tactical advantage, and upon returning home, he started recording live audio. Within a seemingly empty house, Smith sat in his basement armed with his Ruger Mini 14 rifle and beverages, waiting for someone to break in. Like a hunter patiently waiting to have a shot at its unsuspecting prey, Smith sat in a cushioned armchair at the bottom of his basement stairs. It was a frigid winter day in Minnesota, and as Smith sat, lodged in between two bookcases, the shadows would form the perfect camouflage to protect him from an unwanted intruder. Nicholas was the first to enter. He smashed a window in the spare bedroom in the back of the house and climbed through. After spending 12 minutes in the house, Nicholas made his way down the basement stairs.
Park to the north, 100 yards north of the corner, and walk in from the west. I realize I don't have an appointment, but I would like to see one of the lawyers here.
At the first sight of Nicholas, Smith shot his gun twice, striking Nicholas in the torso, which caused him to fall to the floor. Smith pulled the trigger once more, this time hitting Nicholas in the head. Autopsy reports would later show that the final shot would travel through Nicholas's finger before entering his skull, presumably as Nicholas tried to shield himself from the attack. The report also concluded that all 3 shots could have resulted with a fatality. Smith's audio recording caught it all. Smith then proceeded to wrap the teen's body in a tarp and dragged him off to a different part of the basement, which can all be heard on the audio. When interrogators later asked Smith if he recalled what the boy was wearing, he responded, "He was dressed like a high schooler, but much too old. He had a fancy belt, jeans. When Nicholas first fell down the stairs, his shoes came off." Smith made sure to point out that he checked the tread on the bottom of Nicholas's shoes to see if it matched the imprint left by a previous robber when they kicked in one of his doors. After positioning Nicholas's body, Smith headed up to the main part of his home, only to hurry back down to the basement. Smith reloaded his rifle and situated himself back in his basement armchair. On the recording, you can hear shortly thereafter as Haley entered through the broken window, calling out for her cousin, completely unaware of what had just transpired only moments before. As Haley descended down the stairs, Smith quickly shot his rifle off again, striking Haley. When he placed his finger on the trigger for a second shot, it jammed. Smith can be heard saying, "Oh, I'm sorry about that." And Haley can be heard saying, "Oh my God." Due to his jammed rifle, Smith grabbed his secondary firearm that he had holstered across his chest, one that he carried regularly on him since the burglaries of his house first started. He took the .22 caliber revolver and shot several times into the young girl's torso before ridiculing her and dragging her off to where her cousin's body lay. Smith then stacked the bodies on the tarp. Smith later confessed that he used the tarp in the basement so blood wouldn't soak into his carpet.
You said you put both of them on the tarp and you drug both?
No, I dragged him in on the tarp.
Yes.
And then she came down later, and I dragged her onto the tarp afterwards.
Okay, yep,
That was mostly just to minimize the amount of blood in the carpet, but I'm going to replace the carpet anyway.
Okay. And then you drug her back in right by him, is that correct? The milk
Yes.
carton? Okay. And then,
shut the door so I didn't have to see him.
okay. And that's where they both
That's where
were
you
at
found
when we came to your house and
Yep.
you pointed out to us, showed us that's where they were, correct?
Yeah.
With Haley clinging to life while laid atop her cousin, Smith positioned his pistol under her chin. With one last shot, he fired up towards her cranium.
You're dead.
He later admitted to police that he shot the teen intruders more times than he needed to, but that he wanted to put them out of their suffering. In the audio clip, Smith can be heard talking to himself right after the shootings.
Cute. I'm sure she thought she was a real pro. I feel a little bit safer. Not totally safe. I'm still shaking a bit, but a little bit safer.
While standing over the dead bodies, Smith also can be heard on the recording practicing what sounds like his statement to police.
I am not a bleeding heart liberal. I felt like I was cleaning up a mess. I was doing my civic duty. They weren't human. I don't see them as human. I see them as vermin.
After the incident, Smith waited 24 hours before notifying police. Smith claims he didn't want to bother them during the Thanksgiving holiday.
Right after everything happened, okay? It's done.
I sat there for maybe 2 hours. The blood was pounding in my ears.
Where'd you sit it? Back in
the reading chair.
Oh, okay. And then after 2 hours, then what'd you do? Were you home the entire time?
I was in the basement, hiding in the basement the entire time.
Okay. Did you leave the residence at all from when the incident happened up into my arrival at your home?
No.
Okay.
That was the first time I unlocked the door.
Okay, so you were home the entire time.
In fact, I was afraid to go upstairs because I thought there might be somebody with a gun looking in the windows.
On November 23rd, police placed Smith under arrest and took him in for questioning. It was noted at the time Smith was dealing with duress with the sudden loss of his mother. Meanwhile, Haley and Nicholas's family wondered why the two cousins were absent from their family gathering. But what had driven them to attempt to steal from Smith on that chilling Thanksgiving day? To know that, we must first find out what kind of people they were. Haley, an all-American 18-year-old, had spent her entire life in Little Falls. She was in her senior year of high school. Haley could be described as a born competitor in sports and a hard worker holding jobs at various fast food establishments. Haley's swim coach, Carly Davich, says of the 18-year-old, she was always happy. She had a way that just made everyone happy. A lot of the swimmers and divers looked up to her. Nicholas was also well-liked and was known for his unfading smile. Nicholas's sister, Crystal Schafel, said that her 17-year-old brother worked for their father, trimming trees, and made decent money. Schafel speculates that the two were in search of prescription drugs, since she claims that Haley had stolen Adderall from her household in the past. Haley had a known history of substance abuse, but was on the road to recovery and trying to straighten out her life. However, at the time of the break-in, toxicology reports show that Haley had both marijuana and the chemical components of cough medicine in her system, in levels that would render her intoxicated and capable of hallucinating. Smith claims that Haley laughed at him after his gun jammed, prompting him to retaliate more severely.
It jammed, trigger clicked, and she laughed at me. I just pulled out the .22 and shot her.
When police brought Smith in for interrogation, he calmly recollected the series of events. He did so in a matter-of-fact way that didn't align with the weight of the situation that just took place.
For the past month, my life has been very unhappy. I haven't slept very well. And I'm keeping everything locked up all the time because I'm being victimized again and again and again. And in the past couple of weeks, I've gotten into the habit of carrying my guns with me inside my house because I don't know who's going to break in when. So I'm sitting there and I hear the steps come down the hallway. These are people who've stolen my guns. I figure they're willing to use guns if they steal guns. And I decide that I've got a choice of either shooting or being shot, which is sort of what I came to when I started carrying with me. This past month I felt very threatened.
Okay.
inside my own home. And the guy came down the stairs and I shot him. After I shot him, I sat down in this chair and I was just tingling. Adrenaline. I hate adrenaline. And my blood was pounding in my ears, and I just wanted to calm down more than anything else. And maybe, it's hard to judge the time, 2 minutes, maybe 5 minutes, I was just sitting there with the blood pounding in my ears. And I hear more footsteps coming down the hallway. And somebody else starts down the stairs. And thinking back on it, what happened was, everybody has red buttons. Everybody has, and I've known since grade school that being ganged up on is a sore spot with me. I just couldn't think. I didn't think. I wasn't thinking. I was just, they're ganging up on me. So I killed her too.
Okay.
According to Smith, he had no way of knowing whether or not the intruders were armed, and if his life was in jeopardy. Smith also feared that he could potentially be shot with his own previously stolen gun.
I assumed she had a gun.
Okay.
Either inside something or in the purse or in her hand or whatever. And I'm not going to wait for her to, I'm not going to ask her if she has a gun.
Right. Understandable.
I'm not going to wait until she shows it or if she uses it while I'm looking for it. I had already determined that both of them, I knew they were both gun thieves. As far as I was concerned, they were totally dangerous.
Depending on what U.S. state you live in, the law entitles you to protect yourself and your property to different lengths. Known as the Stand Your Ground laws, or in this case, the Castle Doctrine. It allows someone to protect their property with lethal force under certain circumstances, depending on the state. But where does the law draw the line on what constitutes a reasonable threat, or if excessive force is used? According to Minnesota law, you are able to use lethal force if someone breaks into your home, and the homeowner claimed that he was acting in self-defense. However, prosecution disagreed, saying that Byron David Smith crossed that line. Smith's trial began on April 21, 2014. The trial lasted only a few days before the jury deliberated on April 29th. It took the jury only 3 short hours to come to a conclusion. Byron David Smith was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. One of the 12 jurors said, "The audio recording of the actual killings pretty much convinced me that we were dealing with a deranged individual." Smith's lawyers filed an appeal to the Minnesota Supreme Court to no avail. The court upheld the previous ruling, as did a federal appeals court. On November 20th, 2020, almost 8 years to the day of the Thanksgiving Day killings, Smith filed an appeal with the Supreme Court of the United States. As of today, this appeal is still pending. Social media pages have been set up to rally for his freedom. One Facebook page referred to Smith as a hero. A commenter on the page wrote, "Those kids were punks. The girl was a drug abuser. The boy was a thief. If they had been home like they should have been, this would never have happened." Another commenter responded, "He's a cold-blooded murderer, a coward. He needs to stay in prison until he dies." Jurors declared Smith a murderer, and whether or not a different verdict will be conjured through a new court case in the Supreme Court is yet to be known. One thing is for sure. As Byron David Smith sits locked behind bars for the rest of his life, the one place he won't be anytime soon is home for the holidays.